All right, so get this. We're going deep into Lewis and Clark, but not the part everyone knows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their trip back east. It's a whole other story. And we've got some American History Tellers podcast clips to guide us. Get ready for rain, tough calls, and even some laughs. Bet you didn't see that coming.
It's wild how the return trip really tested them, you know? Going out there blind is one thing, but coming back, all that pressure, tensions rising.
Totally. First up, picture this. Fort Clatsop on the Pacific. Months of rain, elk for dinner, even whale blubber.
Yikes. Not exactly a five-star hotel.
Nope. But even beyond the roughing it, you see them struggling with different cultures, the weight of what they're supposed to do, like establish an American presence, but no direct orders to actually, claim anything.
Right. It's like explore this huge place, but don't promise anything we can't deliver. Tough spot to be in.
For sure. And speaking of tough, Sacagawea, right? The podcast mentioned she was determined to see a whale, baby on her back and all.
It really changes how you see her, you know? Not just a guide. This woman was an adventurer, wanted to experience it all.
Makes you think. And then there were the Chinook people. They had some interesting ideas about beauty, let's say.
Oh, yeah. Head flattening was a thing. Lewis and Clark wrote all about it. Plus, they picked up some English from British traders, words like musket, powder, that kind of thing. Really shows how cultures were already mixing way back then.
So rain, weird food, cultural exchanges. Seems peaceful enough, right? But I have a feeling those tensions you mentioned start to, bubble up.
Oh, they do. Remember, Jefferson's counting on these guys. They need to bring back something big. But as they're getting ready to head east, things with the Chinooks go downhill fast. Thefts, almost a full-blown fight.
Wow, from trading partners to almost burning down a village over stolen stuff. That's a quick turn. What do you think that says about, the power dynamics at play? This tiny group saying they own land that's been inhabited forever.
It's like a mini version of what westward expansion was, right? Two groups with totally different ideas of ownership, land, even justice. The core was in way over their heads.
And then looming over all of this, the Bitterroot Mountains. Round 2. I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
You and me both. They were actually pretty optimistic at first, even though their first crossing was brutal. But the reality of it, deep snow, awful paths, supplies dwindling.
Yeah, and Lewis, bless his stubborn heart, decides to ignore what the Nez Perce guides tell him, like adding gasoline to a fire.
Makes you wonder, was it bad leadership or just that explorer drive? You need that to push boundaries, but ignoring local knowledge, that can backfire big time.
Oh, it did. They had to retreat, follow the Nez Perce's advice. Talk about humbling, but they get through eventually, and then comes a decision that changes everything. Splitting up the core.
Yeah.
What was Lewis thinking?
Maybe he realized that Northwest Passage was a bust. But hey, maybe they could come back with other big discoveries, right? So Lewis takes a group, wants to contact the Blackfeet, find the U.S. northern border. Clark heads southeast, gonna explore the Yellowstone River. And Sergeant Pryor, he's sent to a British trader, Hugh Henney, with a letter that's, pretty strategic.
Strategic. You got to give me the details.
Picture this. Lewis asks Henney to help make peace with the Teton Sioux, right? But the letter also mentions, oh, by the way, we reached the Pacific A&D, we're coming back. Lewis knew Henney would probably tell the British, basically solidifying America's claim on the Northwest. Pretty clever, huh?
Whoa, talk about playing chess, not checkers.
Ah!
But wait, wasn't splitting up a huge GE no-no? What did Jefferson say about that?
Exactly. He wanted minimal risk. This could be seen as, straight up disobedience. Imagine facing the president after that move.
Ooh, awkward. But before we get to that meeting, what about Lewis and the Blackfeet? Didn't Nez Perce warn him about them?
They did. The meeting starts okay, both sides open to trading. Then Lewis, trying to be nice, makes a huge tea mistake. Promises them access to American guns.
And that's where it all goes south. What was wrong with trading guns?
Well, the Blackfeet basically controlled British guns in that area. American guns going to their rivals. That's a threat, right to their power, their safety.
So instead of making friends, he poked a bear.
Pretty much. It's a mess. People get hurt on both sides. Lewis and his group barely escape. Another close call on top of everything else.
Okay, rising tensions, almost dying, a desperate escape. And then, just when you think it can't get crazier, Lewis gets shot by his own WN man.
This part is almost funny, in a tragic kind of way. Remember Private Cruz? The nearsighted hunter?
The one who couldn't tell an elk from a person?
Yep, that's the one. Mistakes Lewis for an elk, shoots him, right in the behind.
Oh man, that's rough. But beyond the pain, how does this mess up their trip even more?
Well, Lewis is stuck in a canoe for weeks. Slows them down big time. Imagine the frustration, right? Surviving the Blackfeet, only to get shot by your own guy. Plus, the pressure of leading a wounded expedition through dangerous territory.
You can practically feel the stress. But they do eventually make it back to familiar ground, right?
They do. Reaching those Mandan villages must have felt like coming home. But like a lot of their return, it's bittersweet.
So they're back in Mandan territory, but I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and roses. What went wrong this time?
Well, first off, those peace treaties they worked so hard for, gone. The Mandan and Arikara are fighting again. And even worse, some of the Shoshone who helped them cross the mountains, they've been killed. Really shows how things could change so fast out there.
Yeah, makes you think. Changing the world isn't easy. But it wasn't just bad news, right? They had to say goodbye to some friends, too.
Right. This is where they part ways with Sacagawea, Charbonneau, and John Coulter. Each one, their story is like a glimpse into frontier life, you know, the good and the bad. Like John Coulter, that guy became a famous mountain man, exploring all over Yellowstone.
Talk about a wild spirit. But even with those goodbyes, the Corps has a long way to go before St. Louis. What was that last stretch like?
A real race against time, especially with Lewis still hurt from that gunshot. But they make it, finally. Can you imagine? St. Louis, huge crowd at the river, everyone cheering. Remember, folks thought they were dead.
Must have been amazing seeing familiar faces after so long. But I bet this homecoming was just the start of another chapter, huh?
Absolutely. Life after the expedition, well, it took some twists and turns. Clark seemed to adjust okay, got married, family life, all that. But Lewis, he had a much harder time.
The podcast mentioned depression, drinking. It's tough to hear, knowing what he went through out there. Why do you think coming home was so hard for him?
It shows how exploration can really get to you, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, and they didn't accomplish everything Jefferson wanted, right? No Northwest Passage, those alliances were shaky at best.
It's like you come back from this incredible adventure and the world's moved on without you. And to top it off, Lewis has trouble getting those journals published.
Imagine that. Years of your life documenting every detail and the story gets buried. Those journals, they were everything they worked for. But Lewis, his mental state kept delaying things.
It's like climbing Everest and not being able to show anyone the photos.
Yeah.
And tragically, Lewis's story ends just a few years later, 1809. His suicide, it really makes you rethink the whole expedition, doesn't it?
It does. These guys, they did amazing things, but there's so much struggle, sadness mixed in. Reminds you that history, it's not just big events, it's real people with flaws, with pain.
And speaking of stories that get overlooked, we got to talk about York, Clark's slave. It's a stark reminder how slavery was woven into this whole thing, even with their achievements.
Here's a man who faced every danger right alongside the rest. But he didn't get the same rewards, the same recognition when they got back. York's story, it shows the inequality baked into exploration, westward expansion.
It's like, yeah, we celebrate these triumphs, but we can't forget the injustice. And just like with York, there's so much we don't know about Sacagawea's life after the expedition.
Yeah, what happened to her? Some records say she died young, but Shoshone oral history, they say she lived a long life, went back to her people. It's like she represents those missing pieces in history, you know? Especially when it comes to voices like hers.
It's a puzzle with gaps, and we got to consider every possibility. So even with that grand return to St. Louis, all the cheering, seems like Lewis and Clark faded from memory for a while.
They did. It wasn't until the 1900s, when America was really solidified out west, that they got popular again. They became symbols of expansion, but that narrative, it often leaves out the messy stuff we've been talking about.
It really makes you wonder, how do we choose who to remember? Whose stories get told, whose get lost?
It's a good reminder to question everything, you know? Look for different viewpoints. If we want to really understand history, we need all those voices.
Okay, so after all this, what's the big takeaway from Lewis and Clark? They opened up the West, no doubt. Maps, info on tribes, resources. But at what cost, right?
Yeah, tough question. It's this amazing feat of exploration, but you can't ignore the downsides. Conflicts, treaties broken, Native Americans pushed off their land. It's a mixed bag for sure.
Makes you think, who really benefited? The whole nation, or just certain people looking to, cash in on westward expansion? We've talked about York, Sacagawea. Their stories show how individuals got caught up in all this.
Absolutely. Those individual stories, they often get lost in the big picture. But history is made up of people's lives, right? Each one with its own twists and turns.
In Sacagawea, we've talked about the mystery of what happened to her. But her story, all that uncertainty, what does that say about this time period?
She's like a symbol of how Native Americans contributed, often without getting credit. Guide, translator, diplomat. She was essential. But we still don't know the whole story. Those different accounts of her life afterward, it shows how history can be incomplete, biased.
It's like, don't just take one version as the truth. Dig deeper. Look at things from different angles. Those missing voices, they matter.
Exactly. History's not set in stone. It's a conversation that keeps going. So as you learn more about Lewis and Clark, this whole westward expansion thing, keep asking questions. Don't just accept what you hear. Look for different perspectives.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's amazing what Lewis and Clark did, but you can't forget the hard parts, the impact it had.
It reminds us that progress, exploration, it doesn't always come easy. And history, it's never black and white. It's messy, full of contradictions.
So as you go on your own journey through history, keep an open mind, all right? Ask yourself, was the cost of westward expansion really worth it? Who came out on top? And what about those people whose stories haven't been told? Those voices are just as important if we want to understand the whole picture. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Lewis and Clark. Until next time.